Formations are talked about a hell of a lot in football, but in today's video we're going to go through and discuss, should Bradford City stick with the 3-4-2-1 going into next season, or should we go with a more conventional 4-3-3 that we saw Bradford City start to implement towards the back end of last campaign. If you do go on to enjoy today's video, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. 200 likes on today's video would be massively appreciated, and let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Let me know down below, what do you think Bradford City's preferred formation should be going into next season? Obviously it's useful to be able to play more than one system, and I do think towards the latter stages of last campaign Bradford City played a lot better in a back four, whether it was a 4-3-3, a 4-2-3-1, a 4-1-4-1, whatever you want to call it. Bradford City for a lot of the time did play much better in that formation. I think Plymouth at home, Mansfield at home, Barnsley away, Bolton at home, just a few games to really briefly mention. Let's waste no further time though and get straight into it. So as we can see now, this is how Bradford City's squad is currently lining up heading into next season, and obviously we have only made one addition so far. We have only seen one departure as well. We are now in the middle of June, and by this time in the 2022 summer we'd made nearly double figures for signings, and we're only on one as of right now. So again, we're being very specific with our recruitment. Ryan Sparks said in his end of season interview that he always does with the club that we've been chasing Jake Beasley for a number of years, 3 or 4 years, something like that. Obviously Beasley didn't want to play in League 2. Now he's going to be challenging hopefully at the top end of League 1 in Claret and Amber, but he has been our only signing so far, and obviously your recruitment largely does depend on what formation that you're going to play. Bradford City didn't sign any, on paper, natural wingers. I know Stephen Humphries is obviously a big conundrum, but we didn't sign any wingers last summer because traditionally we don't play with wingers, and obviously Humphries did play as a striker for 95% of the season. But if you are going to play a 4-3-3, that obviously means that you do need wingers and maybe some more defensive-minded fullbacks rather than wing-backs that Bradford City have recruited. So I think the main formation we're going to be able to tell very quickly in some of the signings that we do make over the next week or two. Are we going to go to the 4-3-3? Are we going to stick with the 3-4-2-1 that has given us a lot of success over the last 2 years or so? But having a look at Bradford City's current squad, and in the 3-4-2-1 formation, here is what I think is Bradford City's best option at this moment in time. Again, there is still a lot of business to be done. A lot does certainly need to change in this squad. We clearly need another goalkeeper. We definitely need at least one more centre half to come in. We certainly need another holding midfielder and also an attacking midfielder in there as well. Obviously we've got squad depth, and the likes of Caden Jackson for example are very unlucky not to make it into this side, but I do think if the season was to start tomorrow and Bradford City were to stick with the 3-4-2-1, I do think that is a very solid side. Obviously if you get some injuries and then you don't necessarily have the strength in depth to play this consistently across a full campaign, but in terms of the 3-4-2-1, that is what I currently have as Bradford City's best team. I think that team, if the season was to start tomorrow, will probably finish in and around the playoffs, might just nick in, might just nick out, depending on injuries and all that sort of stuff. But there's certainly room to improve on, but that's certainly a very strong base point to build on compared to where we were this time last season, where there obviously a lot more business to be done, and now I'd be pretty comfortable going into the season starting with that, and that's without all the business that we're going to do over the next 6 or 7 weeks or so. But if the season was to start tomorrow and Bradford City were to play a 4-3-3 formation, I know it says on screen 4-1-2-3, but if I put 4-3-3 it says 4-3-2003, and as much as I'd love us to have that many players on the pitch, I don't quite think, even though a lot of the referees at League 1 level are very stupid, you wouldn't get away with having over 2,000 players on the pitch. But in terms of the 4-3-3, obviously it does offer you something very different. Apparently I've signed as a new player in left back because we are missing Ibu Tori's official proper name there, so I'll just quickly correct that. I do think that team is much more attacking than the 3-4-2-1. Obviously you've got one less defender in there, you've got an extra holding type of midfielder in there. I know it's quite hard to compare the 4-3-3 to the 3-4-2-1, but it's certainly a much more attacking formation. It did feel like at times towards the back end of the campaign that Bradford City had been found out a little bit, and especially away from home we really did struggle across the full season, and we've not been great across the last 2 seasons away from home. Obviously our home record has been very strong, although towards the back end of the campaign I think it was just 1 win at home in our last 5 or 6 matches, which obviously isn't ideal, and that was obviously against Northampton Town, who did they finish bottom of the table in the end, which obviously doesn't make for particularly great reading when we only scraped past them with a 1-0 win. And another day, they certainly could have got more out of it. So the question is, do Bradford City go to the 4-3-3? I think you'd certainly see better qualities come out of the likes of Joe Wright and Curtis Tilt when it's not as necessary for them to be as strong on the ball as what it is in a back three system. Obviously, the midfield is very attacking and it's quite small. Not a single player in there over 6 foot. I do think in a central midfield type role, then George Lapsley would get more game time than an Anthony Sarcevic, who obviously is now in his mid-30s, and you can't be relying on Sarcevic. As brilliant as a football that Anthony Sarcevic is, we cannot be relying on him as heavily as what we did last campaign. That is simply a fact. You try and play him 90 minutes every game and he's going to blow up and get injured because he's just at that stage of his career. And obviously if we got him a lot earlier on in his career, then the club wouldn't have been able to afford him because we were a League 2 side and he was clearly a League 1 player getting paid very good money at National League at Stockport County. So we've got to enjoy Sars while we've still got him, because I don't think he's got long left playing at this level, but when he is playing, he's an absolutely fantastic footballer. But this formation will then obviously see the likes of Caden Jackson and Stephen Humphries come in and play in at those winger positions. You can certainly make the argument for Tyreek Wright on the left wing, but I do think even in a 4-3-3, Wright is much more likely to get game time as a left back rather than a left winger. I think there's too much pressure on him when he is playing in those real attacking positions to deliver, and I don't quite think that he's got that in the locker. But I think defensively, when there's a bit less attacking pressure on him to really perform and take players on, that is when I do think we see the best of Tyreek Wright, and obviously he has massively improved defensively as well. Right back, I've decided to go with Aidan Baldwin over Josh Nerfel. I think defensively he's much more assured, and I actually think on the ball Aidan Baldwin is a better footballer than Josh Nerfel. Obviously Baldwin doesn't have the explosive pace that Josh Nerfel does have, but I think we saw in the couple of games that Baldwin did play at right back, apart from against Sissoko in the league game against Bolton, he was very strong in that role. Regardless of whether it is a 4-3-3 or it's a 3-4-2-1, I do think Jake Beasley is the starting striker for Bradford City next season. It'll be interesting to see if we do bring in another option at the top end of the pitch, given that we've already obviously offered a new deal to Nick Powell. Will Swan is still under contract. Caden Jackson obviously still under contract but can play in other positions. Same can be said about Stephen Humphries as well. You've got young Harry Ibbotson coming through, but I do think with the money that we spent on Jake Beasley and for how long that we've been chasing after Beasley, it does make sense that he is the starting striker. And while at times his finishing might be a little bit inconsistent, he might not be as clinical as somebody like a Will Swan, I think he's certainly going to suit a Graham Alexander system much better. And we know that we can't do the high press across the full season. We might start out with Will Swan at the beginning of the campaign, as we saw at the beginning of last season. I do think in terms of playing a high press, Will Swan is certainly Bradford City's best striker to do that. But we know, as we saw last campaign, Swan does pick up a lot of injuries across the full season. And when you're going away to a Bromley on a Tuesday night, Jake Beasley is going to be the starting striker of Bradford City. Big physical target man at the top end of the pitch, 20 goal contributions last campaign, fit, available, works incredibly hard as well. I think he's a proper Graham Alexander type of striker, and regardless of the formation, Bradford City are going to be getting a lot of crosses into the box, whether it's from Nerfel and Tyreek Wright in the 3-4-2-1 formation or whether it's from Jackson and Humphries in the 4-3-3. There's going to be a lot of crosses going into the box. I think we put in the most amount of crosses in League 1 last campaign, or we were certainly right up there. And unfortunately, you look at a lot of our strikers, none of them are particularly great at heading the ball, apart from maybe Nick Powell's goal away at Barnsley, which was obviously originally very good play by Stephen Humphries. But the problem for me with the 4-3-3 is I think we wouldn't necessarily get overrun in the midfield, because I think there's a lot of legs in there with Metcalf and Lapsley, and Poynton also works incredibly hard as well. But if you come up against, for example, Plymouth's midfield last campaign, when they had Boateng and I think it was Weirdo in there as well, both well over 6 foot, absolute monsters in the midfield, that would be my concern for Bradford City. So then do you maybe give an opportunity to somebody like a Tommy Lee, but where does he fit in there? Because I think defensively he switches off a little bit too much to play as the holding midfielder, and then I don't think he offers you enough going forward as one of the two central midfielders where Poynton and Lapsey are. So there's obviously a lot of things to consider. Again, recruitment is going to play a large part in this. If we go and bring in a Charlie Webster, which is very unlikely, or a James Kirby, there's a lot of different players that Bradford City could potentially recruit, which will obviously change the plans going forward. But again, I may remind you, we've got options to play either the 3-4-2-1 or the 4-3-3, but this is ultimately what Bradford City squad does come down to. And we have also got a fair few players that can play in a number of positions. We've got a lot of versatility in there, which I think is going to be incredibly important across a full season. But let me know what you think down below. What should be the starting formation for Bradford City next campaign? Should it be the 3-4-2-1, which has given us a lot of success over the last couple of years, or should it be the 4-3-3, which proved to be very successful for Bradford City in the final few weeks of the campaign? Let me know what you think down below, as well as how many signings are you expecting to come in through the door for Bradford City. Just one completed by the middle of May, so let me know, sorry, not middle of May, middle of June. And obviously Bradford City's season did finish a little bit later than the majority, given that we were in the playoff semi-finals, but our season did finish around about a month ago now, so maybe more people might have expected a little bit more business, or who knows, business might have been agreed, but players are still on holiday and they're not officially signing and doing their media and all that sort of stuff, and that's the reason why it's not been announced. But let me know what you think down below. Drop a like on there for me. 200 likes would be massively appreciated. Subscribe to the channel as well if you are new. Thank you all for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon for another one.